Remembrance is the secret of redemption, and that forgetting leads to exile. Basically, when exile means forgetting. And if you forget and you don't remember, then you can do what you like, because you can say, well, I think I laud you, Scott, for doing all these doing this. Remembrance is actually so important because it leads to understanding. And once you start understanding what life is all about, the good and the bad, you have choices and you can actually see. And that is why I always tell the good and the bad.
And I wanted to tell you about my father, how every day he used to work, but in the evening he took his time, and he spent every evening he spent reading to me. I never forgot that. And I'll tell you about my mother. Right at the beginning of the war, in the winter of 1939 and 40, the Germans brought a whole bunch of Jewish people from small towns. She just took them out of their homes, whatever they could carry, and brought them and put them on the market in the city of Lublin. And it was very cold in winter, and my mother heard of it. So she picked herself up. She says, as small a place as we have to help. She went down to the market and took a family, a father, a mother, and a little girl, and brought them home. And they stayed with us as long as we were allowed to stay in those premises.
I tell people I was wounded in Holland. A Dutch girl broke my heart.
Mr. Churchill. And Mr. Churchill was the head of all British forces. And that's him there. And I asked him, he smoked a big cigar. You're going to see that in a minute. But I asked him not to put the cigar in his mouth because I wanted to take his picture. And he was giving me a problem when his number one man tipped me on the shoulder and says, "What's the problem, Sonny?" And I said, "I want to take his picture, but I don't want to have a cigar in his mouth." He took this picture of him lighting the cigar, talking to two of our officers.
For me, I think oral history is very important as it provides us with a first-hand account on history, which is an experience that's very difficult to have in a classroom.
That was me 3 years ago, a grade 9 history student getting ready to follow in my sister's footsteps. My oldest sister, Sam, was in Mr. Masters' class when the oral history project was really establishing itself. She was the beginning of what Mr. Masters would call his decade of Wassermans, and my sister Cassie was there when the oral history project was achieving national recognition. And now that I'm getting ready to graduate, I'm glad to say that I've made my mark too. Everyday people living their lives are part of history. At times they endure unspeakable trauma, but they also live through jubilant and uplifting times. And at times they make sacrifices that not only shape their personal history, but also shape the larger collective narrative. That's what the Crestwood Oral History Project is all about. Connecting those stories by speaking to people who lived through them. Students can learn about history in so many ways: books, documentaries, movies, and there's nothing wrong with these mediums. But technology makes it possible for students to learn in all new ways, and an up-close interview between a small group of students and the people who were there to live through history that can be edited and digitized for a global audience is the route we've chosen as our focus. It all begins with the students' own questions and a process of inquiry that is at the heart of education. The Oral History Project is a program where students take on the role of a historian, interviewing and chronicling the experiences of either a family member or someone in the community. Mr. Masters encourages the students to use their skills from many areas: prose and poetry, artwork, music, information technology, and so on. Individual creativity is an important part of the process. The goal is to produce a digitally edited video interview, complete with digitalized material that will be incorporated into our school's website at www.crestwood.on.ca/OHP. Students look at the subject's old photos and learn that a picture really is worth 1,000 words. 21st century students live in a world that's dominated by technology, so having us use these skills in history demonstrates the integrative nature of education at Crestwood. The interview is just part of the process, much of which is based on online research. Researching this period of history forces students to develop their internet literacy. Studying the wartime period also lets students learn about the potential for abuse of technology, as we are inevitably exposed to the dark side of the online world, sometimes without knowing it. This project helps us to develop this discretion. So how do we do this? We visited Baycrest and Sunnybrook hospitals many times and reached out to local legions, cultural centers, and visited people in their homes. Community outreach and service has been a big part of the Oral History Project. And students of different grade levels often work together too, so there's a built-in mentorship component as well. It's a means of connecting the community and a great intergenerational conversation. Mr. Masters grew up talking to his grandparents, and he has worked their life stories into his lessons. He, along with Mr. Hawkins, focus on the World War II Holocaust era, as it is a universal event for the generations who lived through it. And it's important for my generation to speak to these people while the opportunity is still present. As a truly universal experience for all involved, the war is a good reference point where students can learn one event can produce different perspectives. The Crestwood Oral History Project has evolved into something substantial from a simple idea. And there are so many unintended consequences. For many senior citizens, it has taken on a therapeutic character, allowing them to share and connect. For example, Len Rubenstein and Esther Bem spoke at Crestwood when the program first began, with the former participating right up to his 92nd birthday. Both have since passed away, and while we miss them, we're happy that their lessons can endure on the school's webpage. Both of their families have reached out from around the world to express their gratitude for the program. Transcendent moments of optimism have come our way from people who went through terrifying ordeals, demonstrating the sheer will of the human spirit. As such, the interviews can highlight spiritual questions and ethical dilemmas, and the students confront these issues head-on. In a small group setting, they are much more inclined to say what is really on their mind. And it has ended up being a great first-hand exposure to gerontology. Many students have not really dealt with people in their 90s. And in dealing with people who went through an ordeal, every theme imaginable, family, resistance, trauma, recovery, and identity, comes into play. And this lets students see the emotional connection. It contributes to the learning that goes beyond academic and intellectual, and which can be cathartic and empathetic for all involved. The interviews let people open up, and they create a dialogue that can be life-changing. Many Holocaust survivors, often children themselves when they went through such an unspeakable horror, have indicated that the program lets them create a new generation of witnesses, allowing memory to be kept intact for a new generation. That's what it's all about, the preservation of memory. These innocent people did not deserve to be erased from history, nor do their stories of those who made it out. Where they are able, students conduct interviews and do research into their own family history, a process that creates a real bond between the student and their subjects. Many students comment that they learned things they never knew, and many parents have been thankful for our initiating this.
It was fate that the Oral History Project was assigned from history class. I interviewed my grandfather in the hospital just 3 days before he passed away. The interview gave me a final opportunity to have a face-to-face, heart-to-heart conversation with him. It taught me a lot about my family background and gave me a point of view that I could not have learned from watching movies, listening to the news, reading books, and sitting in a history class. Thanks to the Oral History Project, my family has a permanent record of my grandfather's story in his own voice. And that is a priceless gift that I and my entire family will forever be grateful for.
Segments of interviews can be incorporated into the classroom as they pertain to the topics of discussion. The students see this project has a democratic feel to it, and they are creating a lesson and are in fact teaching one another. An ongoing evolution of the Oral History Project involves students interviewing people from Toronto's many diverse communities. Many of the interviews connect the issues that are relevant to Canadian culture and the larger context of human rights. They can be difficult topics, but they are necessary. And studying individuals or groups who did take action show that it is possible to do the right thing. Finding a way to express solidarity and kindness is possible, even in view of great pressures and intimidation. Students are introduced to remarkable role models, and they get to hear about them from the people whose lives they saved. Language and culture can be a barrier, but as Toronto is a multicultural environment, students of various backgrounds have been able to break through. On many occasions, people were interviewed for this project in their first languages by students fluent in those languages, and then translations and overdubs were added. The technology at times has also been challenging, but Mr. Masters has drawn on his students' talent, and they have flipped the classroom. For his work, Mr. Masters has been honored by the Dominion Institute as their inaugural Memory Project Teacher of the year 2007. and in 2009, 2 of his students were selected to join Prime Minister Harper for his trip to France to commemorate the 65th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Interviews on CP24 and 680 News on The John Tory Show followed, where Mr. Masters shared the spotlight with my older sister Sam. In 2010, Mr. Masters' former students nominated him for the prestigious Bailey Award, which is handed out by Queen's University to secondary school teachers who have made a positive impact in the lives of their students. The accolades have continued to roll in. In 2011, it was the Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence. In 2012, it was the Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching History, followed by a national article in the Globe and Mail. 2 of Mr. Masters' grade 12 history students were selected as winners of the Vimy Pilgrimage Award that year, out of a national total of 20. Mr. Masters made his very own Vimy pilgrimage and battlefield tours that same summer. Then in 2013, Mr. Masters garnered the Citizen and Immigration Canadian Award for Excellence in Holocaust Education. That honor led to his being appointed to a diplomatic delegation to visit Germany in 2014, studying Jewish life in Germany 70 years after the Holocaust. In April 2015, the Crestwood Oral History Project was again highlighted as a feature article in the Toronto Star and in the national magazine, Canada's History. So the recognition has been there. But does it work? As students graduate, they often do exit interviews, where they recall the moments that struck them and the lessons they took away. Most are very specific, so it is evident that this project is working if it works for them.
It's striking how different all your stories have been. It takes a lot of courage to speak about what you have experienced, and for that, I think of all of you as heroes. These videos and your stories will last for a very long time and will be shared with numerous generations to come. What happened during that fateful period will never be forgotten. Each time I hear you all speak, it always evokes a sadness in me, which makes me wonder how people can amount to such horrors.
I have been a part of the Oral History Project for 3 years now, and I can truly say that it has been one of the most beneficial things I have done while I've been at Crestwood. My first interview was with my grandfather, who before the project had never talked about his wartime experiences. His interview allowed me to learn about my own family's history and internalize the story for everyone else in my family as well. I wanted to continue participating in this project because I then understood the value of these interviews for both the interviewer and the interview subject. Through these interviews, I've heard stories of some of the darkest periods in our history, but through them, I've also heard stories of heroism, bravery, and righteousness. Most importantly, I have learned the importance of applying these themes in the present day and as we move into the future.
The Crestwood Oral History Project is proud to feature your story and do what we can to highlight the experiences of the wartime generation. And now it's time for your story.